Welcome. Bonjour. My name is Brock Dickinson. I'm the entrepreneur in residence with the Faculty of Environment here at the University of Waterloo, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to the inaugural meetings of the Sustainable Development Solutions Network Canada. This is a working meeting, and I've been told not to swan about, so we're going to sort of work right into things and get underway as quickly as we can. We've had a bit of a change in the order of events this morning, but we will sort of move ahead with things and get through the entire program as quickly as we can. I want to start this morning by welcoming you to Waterloo and to the Centre for International Governance Innovation and acknowledging that we've gathered on the traditional territories of the Attawandaron, the Anishinaabe, and the Haudenosaunee peoples. I'd also like to acknowledge that we're in a place today that's situated on the Haldimand Tract, which is land that was promised to the Six Nations that includes 6 miles on either side of the Grand River. And as I thought about that acknowledgement this morning, I was struck in particular by the relationship that we have with the Haudenosaunee specifically, a relationship that's governed by something known as the covenant chain, often symbolized visually as a series of silver chain links joining a British ship to the Haudenosaunee Great Tree of Peace. And the covenant chain says that our two communities will forever be bound to work together for peace, justice, and friendship. The chain dates back more than 3 centuries and says that collectively we will work together, and these are the words that the elders continue to share with us. We will work together as long as the sun shines, as long as the waters flow, and as long as the earth is green. And as we meet today to talk about the SDGs, I hope that the covenant chain and that spirit of peoples working together to keep the earth green will guide the discussions, the actions, and the ideas that emerge. But as I said, as we look at today's agenda, today's a working meeting. We're here to do some very specific things. I've got one line of specific background around what SDSN is. The SDSN is building a global network of universities, research centers, civil society organizations to advance work on sustainable development and support the Sustainable Development Goals. Everything else that you need to know about the SDGs we'll figure out together over the course of the day as we work through these discussions. We're here to build a national network, to bring our institutions, our organizations, our communities together. And although many of us have come together from many places, and there's a lot of people to acknowledge, a lot of great leaders in our communities and on the sustainable development front here, I want to acknowledge just one specific group before we get underway, and that's the inaugural members of the Leadership Council of SDSN Canada, who are here with us today. Dean Jean Andre, the Dean of the Faculty of Environment at the University of Waterloo. Amy Lewers, the Executive Director of Future Earth. Rainer Mueller, the Principal of the Mount 7 Group. Dominique Sury, Executive Director of the Youth Climate Lab. Professor Mark Jacquard from Simon Fraser University. And David Miller, the C40 North American Regional Director and Ambassador for Inclusive Climate Action. Aussi, je veux prendre juste un moment pour parler avec nos collègues francophones ici. La réunion aujourd'hui se passera principalement en anglais. Nous voulons souligner l'idée que nous savons comme réseau national que c'est une priorité de développer et nourrir notre capacité bilingue pour les prochains événements et discussions. But because this is a working meeting, I'll now jump right into things and introduce our first panelists. We've reversed the order of the 2 panels this morning, so what you see as the second panel topic will be where we begin. And panel 2 is focused on understanding the role of the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, here in Canada. I'm going to introduce all 3 of our panelists at once, just to sort of save time, and then ask them each to take about 10 minutes to discuss some of their work, at which point we'll have a few minutes available to us for questions. So speaking first will be Julie Wright, who is the General Manager of the Waterloo Global Science Initiative. Julie had a successful career in public relations and marketing, working in both the tech sector and the consulting fields, both here in Ontario and in Alberta. But in 2010, she joined the Waterloo Global Science Initiative, which is based at the Perimeter Institute for Theoretical Physics, and became its General Manager in 2013. And SDSN globally says that as we start national networks, we need to be partnered with science organizations. And WGSI has become an important and integral founding member of this partnership as we move forward. Following Julie will be Hellebank Jorgensen, who is a globally recognized expert on how the business community engages with sustainable development. She is a board facilitator for the UN Global Compact Board Program, president of the Global Compact Network Canada, and CEO and founder of B.Accountability and the chair of eRevalue. And finally, on this panel this morning, we have Philippe Samborski, who is a senior advisor and economist with Statistics Canada. And Philippe has a passion for using his technical skills in international development. Since 2012, he's advised the International Monetary Fund, including efforts as a regional advisor in West Africa, and he's provided technical assistance in more than 15 countries. In November of 2017, Philippe joined the newly created Sustainable Development Goals Secretariat at Statistics Canada, where his work focuses on clean energy, environment, and biodiversity. As a group, they'll be talking about the current state of work in Canada on the SDGs so that we can understand who some of the existing players are and what some of the existing efforts in this space are all about. And they'll be thinking a little bit about identifying gaps and opportunities for SDSN Canada as we move forward. Please welcome our panelists.
Hello. So I'm just going to talk briefly about the landscape in Canada and what has taken place over the last 3 years since the Sustainable Development Goals were announced in 2015. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about what WGSI does and why we're involved in this SDSN initiative in Canada. So Waterloo Global Science Initiative is a catalyst for collective action. We've been around since 2009 in partnership with the University of Waterloo and the Perimeter Institute. We bring people together in conversation around complex global issues to stimulate new strategic pathways, partnerships, and solutions. On the heels of our 2016 summit, Open Access Energy, which Jatin Ithwani is here. He was our chief scientific advisor for that summit, and you'll hear from him, I think, in this afternoon's session. We worked together to look at energy access globally, and it was right at the time that the SDGs had emerged as a framework, and we realized that we were squarely aligned with STG 7. So as we came out of that event and we're preparing our blueprint document, which really fully fledged out these strategic pathways, we started thinking back about how we could align all of our work with the SDG framework going forward. The way WGSI works is we take a generational view of complex global issues, and so we work with this long time frame. We're very accustomed to that longer time frame. The work that we've done previously has included decarbonizing base load electricity. That was our Energy 2030 Summit in 2011. We turned our focus to Learning 2030 in 2013. Again, Open Access Energy in 2016. And just 2 weeks ago, we concluded Generation SDG. These are big, meaty topics. Usually, we convene a global group around them. But in this case, 2 weeks ago, we convened a Canadian group around what a community-led approach to the implementation of the global goals might look like. So in preparing for this summit 2 weeks ago, we went through a process of talking to people across the country. The first thing we do when we're preparing for a summit is literally make a list of 50 people to call up and pick their brains. That happened about 18 months ago. And at that time, it was like drinking from a fire hose in Canada. There was just so much going on, but none of it had popped up above the surface. And so, there was just a general lack of awareness around the SDGs, even though there were so many different actors playing in that space. And that's something that we see frequently is with any complex global issue, there's a huge amount of duplication. And you really need a catalyst to come in and help to align efforts across sectors. And so what we were approaching in that sort of benchmarking landscape evaluation was to figure out what role we could play, where we could add value in that space. So here's some of the things that we learned that were going on over the past 18 months. We saw benchmarking on Canada's implementation of the goals emerge from the Brookings Institution, led by John MacArthur and Chris Rasmussen. They released a paper last October that measured Canada across all 17 goals. We saw a national benchmarking poll on Canadian attitudes towards the SDGs emerge from the UN Association in Canada with Abacus. That survey showed us that 11% of Canadians had any awareness of the Sustainable Development Goals. But as soon as you started to engage Canadians in conversations about the goals and whether they were a worthy framework, that the approval rating around that jumped up into the 70s, which is really interesting. There's quite an appetite for the goals once they are socialized and once you explain the breadth of them and how they align with Canadian values. We saw the first national conference on the SDGs emerge. This was Together 2017, hosted by the Alberta Council for Global Cooperation. Took place at the University of Calgary last October. Started out as an Alberta initiative and just ballooned because, again, of this appetite for cross-disciplinary conversation around the goals. We saw the emergence of Alliance 2030 through the community foundations in Canada. And this was a really interesting evolution from our Canada 150 celebrations. So it originally was Alliance 150 and its partners. And that has now moved towards, again, the SDG framework as a legacy initiative. And so we're seeing it being reborn. Those partnerships are, already working well together because the gears are all nicely greased, and so now reframing with the global goals agenda, is a really great fit and a great legacy for the country. We saw policy papers from the British Columbia Council for International Cooperation with the Canadian Council for International Cooperation, stepping in when there was no federal paper emerging on how Canada was doing. So the BC CIC came forward with a sort of shadow report on the voluntary national review that is made at the UN during the high-level political forum. CCIC has also evaluated with its global partners all of the voluntary national reviews and gone through a process of establishing what the best practices are, who's doing really great work globally, and so that bedrock is there as well to refer to. We saw the Foundation for Environmental Stewardship step forward with on-campus engagement, so again, that socialization, young people, in regards to the Sustainable Development Goals. We saw the North American chapter of the UN Principles for Responsible Management Education, so the PRIME network, hold a gathering on the SDGs at their Canadian Champion School, University of Guelph. We saw UNESCO research chairs commit to knowledge mobilization around the goals. And we saw groups begin to move forward with conversation on subnational indicators, and I know there'll be more conversation about that in the later today. We also saw the federal government include the SDGs in the 2018 budget, so there's more than $100 million committed over the next coming years. And just on April 24th, the Commissioner for the Environment and Sustainability in the Auditor General's Office reported on the federal government's preparedness. So there's this bedrock now on the SDGs across Canada. There are a number of actions on the way as well, which are notable. On May 1st, New York City announced that it would be the first city to submit a voluntary local review. So while we have this voluntary national review process that's now 3 years old, the voluntary local review process is something new that has emerged through a commission in New York City. So it'll be interesting to see how cities can now align themselves with this process. We'll see the federal government's first voluntary national review at the high-level political forum in July, and BC CIC, again, is producing its own report to complement the federal government's. The United Way is organizing around the Global Impact 2030 initiative. So again, a global initiative wrapped around corporate social responsibility and activating the voluntary core within companies. They have a Canada meeting later this month. We're also seeing the emergence of a Canadian-led SDG framework for venture capital through Venture for Good, which is based here in southwestern Ontario. And then we also know that there is movement towards the SDGs from the finance community. Just 2 weeks ago, when we convened our summit, we also convened a panel on advancing finance for the SDGs, and you can find that on our YouTube channel at YouTube.com. It's WGSI Summit is our YouTube channel. So in the midst of all of this, as I said earlier, we were trying to figure out where we could add value in that space. So our summit format really provides the time and space for deeper reflection on a complex global issue. So we convene a 2.5-day workshop amidst public programming. So we also work with TV Ontario's The Agenda with Steve Paikin to engage in public discourse around each of our summits. And our goal was to really unpack what a community process might look like around the SDGs. The way we work is multi-generational, so half the room is always under the age of 30, multidisciplinary, so we'll have people from all sectors involved in the summit conversations. And in this case, the participants hailed from all parts of Canada. Iqaluit, St. John's, Victoria, we had people from Yellowknife, and all across the 49th parallel. They focused on 5 themes. So we worked on what community ecosystem mapping could look like, community planning, partnerships, the role of innovation, and accountability. And it's a really intense format, and because we're asking this group to actually produce something at the end of 2.5 days. So what we come out of the summit with is called the Generation SDG Communique. That's available now on our website, WGSI.org. And there were 6 policy recommendations that came out of that process. So one is to accept communities and civil society as change agents, and to really engage in a consultation process that is recognizes local knowledge and really actually values the conversation element. So federal, all levels of government can help to contribute to that process. The second recommendation was to issue a national call to action and communicate a national strategy for achieving the SDGs. We don't currently have a federal plan. And so that, really needs to also include knowledge sharing, which obviously post-secondary education can play a massive role in, and monitoring and evaluation systems. Number 3 was to create the conditions for local communities and civil society organizations to succeed. So this is all about an enabling environment, which includes capacity building and successful communication platforms, alignment of initiatives. So when you think about the Smart Cities initiative, it's available to some communities, but not all. So we need to look at that sort of equity platform. Number 4 was reinvigorating 1,200 plus community sustainability plans that exist. Those are the ICSPs that were initiated a number of years ago. So we already have community-based plans. It's now time to dust them off and go deeper into them. If anybody wants to talk more about that, they should look up Amelia Clark. Number 5 is unlocking the potential of philanthropic capital using the recommendations from the Employment and Social Development Canada's Social Innovation and Social Finance Strategy Co-Creation Steering Group. So this group has been working for some time on really investigating how to get the money moving. So this is something that we could really be digging into much further. And number 6, again, this is really applicable to post-secondary, but ensuring that the Tri-Council research funding and ethical guidelines track to the SDGs. So whenever we're in a complex global space like this, we need alignment, and this is why WGSI is working with the SDSN.
Well done. So that was a lot of information. And by the way, good morning. My name is Helle Jorgensen, and I think I should see if I can get this to work. Maybe. There I am. Well done. A lot of information. How are you doing? Good. So I've been asked to present the public in terms of all the companies that's actually working in of the Sustainable Development Goals. So, and I've been asked to put a few slides together. So what you'll get here is just a little bit of overview of who UN Global Compact and Global Compact Network Canada is. How many here know about the Global Compact? I don't need to tell you about it then. Okay, so let me just very briefly, for those of you who do not know who we are, tell you who we are, and then go into what I actually think is most exciting today at 12 noon, and you are supposed to be here all day. So that's why you're getting a little bit of a brief on the survey of what it is that Canadians think about the Sustainable Development Goals that we are going to publicize today at 12 noon. So I will be running as soon as I'm done here, but you can all get this survey online around noon. So, but first and foremost, so with the Global Compact Network Canada, we started 5 years ago now, but is part of the United Nations Global Compact, so the world's largest initiative for responsible businesses. There's around 12,500 CEOs who have signed that they believe in human rights, labor rights, environment, anti-corruption, and now the Sustainable Development Goals. And when we started in Canada 5 years ago, we did not have the Sustainable Development Goals. But as soon as we actually started before 2015 of engaging the Canadian communities in what is the Sustainable Development Goals, why is that important? I have to admit, the first times people said, well, that is something that, well, if we visited the government in Ottawa, well, that is something that Global Affairs is taking care of. And talking to the companies, well, no, that's not really. Until they started realizing what this was. And then that changed. So what you'll see here is that you can see we're using the icons of Sustainable Development Goals many places. We have opened the stock exchange, Toronto Stock Exchange, press the button. You're not allowed to say ring the bell. We have SDG awards, where we are giving awards to not only companies but also universities. We have a lot of different initiatives and working groups. But let me just say, so here you see some of those that got the awards, and more you see some of the ministers here. So we are bringing the Canadian private sector together with actually NGOs, academia, to delegations to Ottawa to talk about what are companies doing, what are the NGOs doing, what are the partnerships that we are establishing in Canada, and how can the government help on that. And I would say from the first times it was us calling them, now they are starting calling us, which is of course a nice change in that regard. So as I said, we are turning 5, and we have tried our best to engage by, as I said, awards, positive impact, say, this is what you can do. And the Lieutenant Governor that you'll see, Her Honor, in the picture number 2 there, is amazing. She is really taking the Sustainable Development Goals to heart. I was invited there last week, and she has really put it for her to make sure that Ontarians, because she's the Lieutenant Governor for Ontario, know about the Sustainable Development Goals. Very, very amazing work. The other thing I want to say is that when I couldn't stand here if I didn't have the support of mostly the businesses, but also the universities, the NGOs, etc., that's part of the network. So if you do not see your logo or the place you hope to work, up here when I'm going through these slides, you know what to do, right? You need to go to your own company or to your university or to the place you like to work and say, why are you not part of the Global Compact Network Canada? Why are you not part of driving the Sustainable Development Goals forward? So here we go. I'm not going to go through name by name, but this is some of the supporters. There's more supporters. There's more supporters. There's more supporters. And I think I have, well, there we go. That was it. Did you see your logos? Good, thanks. Then, as I said, what we do is we do training, because one of the things we saw was there's a lot of companies that said, okay, Hella, we got it. Yes, you want us to go in and look at these Sustainable Development Goals, not only map them to what we're already doing, but look at this as a strategic framework. What are the risks? What are the opportunities? But how do we report about this? Okay, we did a reporting training. We're going to do another reporting training this year. We have working groups where the companies together work on, they ask each other, oh, so what are you doing? What are you doing? And they get good ideas from each other, not only here in Canada, but actually from globally, so these 12,500. I said a little bit about our awards, and that's an amazing way, and we're just starting the awards now, so this is, please, if you're doing something in terms of Sustainable Development Goals, goes for the universities. I would suggest it goes for this network as well. I'm not the judge, because everybody's the judge. So what you do is that you submit your application, we put it on our website, and we promote it, but you promote it too. And whoever gets the most votes from all your peers are the one that's winning, which means that you just need to get this out. So we had another university winning last year as well, and they were very, very good at getting out to all the students. And that's what I want. I want everybody to know about these SDGs. So, of course, it should be good as well. The one we have here, SDG working groups and purely learning roundtables. Again, as I said, going that. And then the STG survey. And this is the time, this is not public yet, so you're getting the sneak peek review. That's why I don't have any slides on it. But it does look like this. You'll be able to download it. And if you can look at see these links here. But what I want to do today is to say that we've done this survey now for 3 years. It's changing a bit from year to year. We are getting more and more people that's actually answering the surveys, both from business, academia, NGOs, etc. And we're not only asking Canadians what do they believe that we should focus on within Canadian borders, outside of Canadian borders, and what is it that businesses focus on, or what do they think they should be focusing on. We're also asking about what are the challenges? What about partnerships? What about reporting? And for today, and looking at the clock here, and make sure that I'm going to read 3 lines that I hope that you'll take into everything you do today, because this is one of the things that we see year by year that Canadians are looking for. So what we're saying here, the executive summary, what has remained relatively consistent is the desire of respondents to continue to engage in, here it comes, partnerships with governments, non-profits, and industry. Organizations would also like to see more education. Anybody here can do education? Good. Training. Anybody here can do training? Mm-hmm. And marketing of the SDGs. Personally, I suggested that we should go to TIFF and make sure that everybody that comes to TIFF will be there with an SDG in front of, and when they walk the streets, because, hey, then we're not only getting it to Canadians, we're getting it to the world. So again, there's many more findings in this survey. I would suggest that you, in the lunch break, download it and then start to actually use it this afternoon. And with that, thank you.
Bonjour tout le monde. D'abord, j'aimerais remercier l'Université de Waterloo et évidemment SDSN Canada pour avoir organisé cet événement qui est extrêmement important. SDGs and the data revolution. In 2014, UN former Secretary General Ban Ki-moon called for a data revolution for sustainable development. You know, data are the lifeblood of decision making and also accountability, transparency. And yes, policies should be based on evidence, high quality data, and not on convictions, right? Which is usually the case, unfortunately, in politics. So in this context, national statistical offices should play a key role coordinating, measuring, and monitoring SDGs, but also supporting and promoting the development of national strategies for sustainable development. And Canada will have its own sustainable development national strategy, and StatsCan will be there to support it. You know, we have 17 goals, 169 targets, over 240 indicators. And if we want no one left behind, it means we also need data more disaggregated by income, by sex, race, ethnicity, geography, and so on. So we need statisticians. They might be boring sometimes, but we need them, definitely, to measure the SDGs. That's our vision in my group about the SDGs. We're basically natural capital and ecosystem services are the foundation of our society, economy, and humankind. Rely on those services to live, survive, and grow. What are those services? Food, raw materials, fresh water, air purification, and so on. Climate regulation, carbon sequestration, so many things. So this graph is a very good illustration of the interconnections between the environment, social, and economic pillars of the SDGs. And the importance as well of partnerships, collaboration, and accountability to achieve those goals. So what StatsCan has done so far on the SDGs? So in StatsCan, there's two groups. One responsible for the global indicators and to report and support the Fed government to report at the United Nations. And we have our group that work on the national strategy. And we're trying to develop relevant national indicators. So one thing the international group did is that data hub that will be used for the Canada's VNR. That hub will be released next week on May 16th. Right now, we have collected, centralized the data for around 130 indicators, of which 100 of them are produced by the Fed government. But also there's other indicators that are produced by international organizations, what we call custodian agencies like OECD, FAO, and so on. Of course, eventually we want to have more indicators. In fact, we would like to cover all indicators. The Data Hub is a first step in Statistics Canada. Of course, it's not perfect at this point. A lot of improvements to be done, but it's at least a first pitch on the data available in Canada. Also, of course, StatsCan participated in the development of the Global Indicator Framework. And StatCan is actively participating also to a lot of United Nations committees on SDGs. Now, at the Secretariat, what do we do? Basically, We have been created in October 2017, and the goal is to support the development of a national strategy, raise awareness regarding SDGs and related disaggregated statistical needs, but also to identify main data gaps and find timely remedies. And believe me, there's a lot of data gaps. Statistics Canada is very good with social and economic statistics. It's a totally different story about environment. There's a big gap on the environment side, unfortunately. We have a system of economic and environment accounts in StatCan, but of course we need more people, more resources, more funding, more awareness on the importance of environmental statistics. One thing we've done so far also is we have identified all the data available at the national and international level for Canada, for all SDGs, all goals. And that's one example, just one example, this one on energy. Here you have the main source of energy used for the electricity generation in Canada. And there's always interesting stories behind the data, right? Like this one is showing that we still have 3 provinces in Canada that mainly use coal to generate electricity. And it was more, in fact, just a couple of years ago. Now we still have Nova Scotia, Saskatchewan, and Alberta using coal. In the north, we're still using those old diesel generators to produce electricity. Think about Inuit and First Nations communities. Good news is that we are producing our electricity from renewable energy sources at 65%. And if we add nuclear power, we are at 80% of, I would say, electricity produced from non-greenhouse gases emissions. But of course, there's a lot of room for improvement. Something else we did as well, the past couple of months, is to work on a provincial and territorial dashboard using 50 indicators. In fact, 3 indicators for each goal, to be used as a baseline to compare provinces and territories' performance in achieving sustainable development goals. And we have quite interesting results. Of course, the goal is to expand the number of indicators used to produce that dashboard. And we use a scoring index methodology to do it, to compare provinces to each other and territories, similar to the one used by the US Cities Sustainable Development Goals Index. So we hope that eventually we'll be in a measure to release that information in StatsCan. Right now it's an internal product, but we're going to push for publishing this information, this very interesting dashboard. And eventually, the goal is also to produce the same type of statistics at the local level. Another ongoing project, very important, and we hope that we're going to have some universities participating to that consultation, is in June 6 and 7 in Ottawa. So we are doing a consultation with TBS, Treasury Board Secretariat, on open data and environment statistics. Because of course, like I said, the data is very limited, sparse. There's a lot of data gaps, and it's very difficult to compare and integrate environment statistics at the national level. So the goal of this consultation is to get more leadership on environment statistics, identify main data gaps, but also make an inventory of what is available at this point, at the academic level, at the government level, but also at the NGO level. So we hope that we're going to see some of you at that consultation on June 6 and 7. We sent invitations to many universities. Let us know if you want to participate, do a presentation. I'm going to give you the information. All right? Very quickly, 2 other projects we have. Statistics, disaggregated statistics for the most vulnerable groups in Canada. For us, it's very important. We have a lot of statistics in Statistics Canada, and we need definitely to share that information with Canadians. And we have also a big project, which is the urban data centers. You know that SDGs, sustainable development, is very important at the local level. In fact, most of the sustainable development will occur at the city level. And right now we're trying to develop more statistical capacity at the city level. And on our side, we're going to try as much as possible to publish, disseminate all the statistics, relevant statistics we have for SDGs at the city level. So that's what's going on right now in StatsCan. Many things, but there's so much else to do. And we hope that we can count on your support to develop a national strategy for SDGs. Thank you so much.
To all three of our initial panelists. We do have time, 4 or 5 minutes for maybe 1 or 2 questions. Are there things that any of you would like to put to the members of the panel as we start to think about how to build on the work that they've described that's already happening in many of our communities? Question at the back. There is a microphone down here, or if you want to shout really loudly, whichever works best.
So at this point, in Statistics Canada, for that project, our focus has been more on the data that we have at the local level that we don't disseminate at this point. Because in fact, we realized then when we look at all the databases, all admin survey-based data we have, that in fact we don't publish. If you look at it, look at CanSim, our database, and in fact we don't have much data at the city level. In fact, we don't disseminate much data at the city level, but we have internally very good data that we could use to develop more relevant variables, indicators for the SDGs. And that's our first priority. And also our second priority is to increase the statistical capacity at the city level. Because cities themselves have a lot of data, but sometimes it's just how to organize it, how to publish it, how to collect it, how to disseminate it on an open data platform. So that has been our focus at this point. Unfortunately, not at that level.
A question here?
Thank you for that. I have a question also about statistics, perhaps at the other scale, which is, what is Statistics Canada's role in contributing to Goal 17, which is the global cooperation and assistance? I mean, StatsCan has in the past had a very good reputation globally for that kind of assistance. Is that an area that you're working on?
Yes, like I said, the international group responsible for SDGs is an active member at the international level. They have participated to the development of the global indicators. That's one thing. We also do in StatsCan at this point a lot of outreach with, first of all, well, you know what, at Statistics Canada level first, because we have a lot of divisions, a lot of expertise, a lot of subject matter, but first of all, is to raise awareness about the SDGs. We did also a lot of outreach with, of course, our federal partners, right? And we did also a lot of outreach with NGOs. Next step, I think, is really at the provincial and local level. And of course, one of the important role for StatsCan is to provide support to increase statistical capacity at those levels. And I hope that StatsCan will be very active at that level. And that's the goal. But of course, we need also resources, we need support, and we need awareness from Canadians, academia, NGOs, to tell Fed government that StatsCan needs to play a big role in SDGs. So we need support from you guys as well. We're statisticians, we're not politicians.
And I have time for one more brief question. Maybe just go to the center here, and we'll be able to continue the discussion off the path as well, in the hat here.
I have a question about the Global Compact.
you're not being paid for what I'm going to say now. I'm just going to tell everybody. Yes, on September 7, we will have the STG Summit taking place in Toronto. Apart from that, yes, they are in terms of the different working groups. The STG, both the survey here shows that companies want to have more and more partnerships. So when we did the SDG Awards last year, we had a partnership with Tech Resources and Nutrition International, as well as Global Affairs, that showcased their partnerships, and we're looking for more and more in terms of those partnerships and bringing that out there. The other issues that you're raising is, one thing is that you have the sustainability department, but we need to ensure that everybody in the organization, I mean, yes, of course, I would hope that they all know that they are part of the Global Compact Network Canada, but even more that they know about this. So we really start to embed it into all the different business functions, but also the supply chain, the value chain, et cetera. And actually, the question that was there before, thinking about, so when we go out to companies, when I go out to companies, from time to time also thinking about, what about the CEO? Should the CEO, when you hire a new CEO, should that person know about the Sustainable Development Goals? Should the board of directors know about the Sustainable Development Goals? Yes, they should. And think if we could have a little scorecard. What about your professors? What about and I'm not going to go into politics, but we could perhaps also think about, what is the scorecard for the political leaders in terms of the Sustainable Development Goals? And that way we'll again be driving this agenda forward. So just a thought, that idea you can take back home.
Thank you very much. Please join me in thanking all three of the panelists for having taken the time to share with us this morning. And we will make a quick transition on the fly here. If I can ask the second panel to step down so the first panel can come up and join us, that would be great. And I'll just do, while Dr. Sachs and Maria are making their way to the front, I'll just make a couple of quick sort of housekeeping announcements. First off, I do want to thank the volunteers who have been working to make this event possible. You'll notice many of them here in black t-shirts. So if you get a chance, say thank them. Many of them are students here in the local community, so thank you for all of your efforts on this front. And for those of you who are actively promoting this event on social media, just a reminder, we shared this last night, but the appropriate hashtags for sharing information are hashtag SDSN Canada and hashtag Waterloo. And if you can sort of promote those out to let the world know what we're doing here today, that would be very much appreciated. Now, I struggled a little with the notion of how I would sort of introduce our next couple of panelists, and recognizing that we're trying to keep this moving along fairly quickly. We're here because most of us are familiar with the work of Dr. Sachs. Some of us are academics and sort of recognize his lengthy and successful career at institutions like Harvard and Columbia, and his appointments at other institutions around the world. Many of us are familiar with his work on environment and development issues and the way that he's championed numerous causes over the years on that front. But I think one of the things that came through to me particularly strongly last night as I listened to his presentation was he's fierce. He's ferocious. And that's what we need as we promote the SDGs. So I'm really looking forward to hearing from him as he shares some insights into where we need to be going to follow in those footsteps today. He'll be followed after his initial presentation by Maria Cortez Puig, who is the head of the National and Regional Networks Program for the Sustainable Development Solutions Network International. Educated in Spain and the United States, Maria has previously worked for UNESCO in the Science Policy and Sustainable Development Division, and periodically served as an advisor with the Permanent Mission of Spain to the United Nations. But we'll begin with Dr. Sachs. He's going to be sharing some thoughts on how the SDSN cooperates with the United Nations and other global organizations, and some examples of past projects that the SDN has been able to drive successfully.
Thank you very much. I won't be ferocious this morning, too early. But what a great first session, and great brainstorming. I actually wanted to speak about major research challenges on the SDGs for Canada and globally, and just speak very briefly on that. Last evening, I quickly talked about the transformation that is required to move the world economy from our current situation, which is broadly successful at economic growth, although with a patchy pattern around the world, to a truly sustainable development trajectory. The difference being that sustainable development has 3 criteria, whereas economic growth has 1 criterion, and that is the rise of income per capita on a market basis. But sustainable development adds 2 other basic criteria. One is fairness, social justice, access to basic needs, maintaining a relatively low level of economic inequality, gender inequality, inequality across groups in society. And the second major pillar is environmental sustainability. The problem, the reason why we have the SDGs, is that economic growth per se certainly does not bring about fair and environmentally sustainable economies. And I hold the US up as model A of an economy that is extremely rich, that is extremely unfair, and that is extremely environmentally destructive. And this is, in fact, our whole society is organized around those, our whole political economy, unfortunately, is organized around those principles right now. So the question is, what kinds of transformations, changes of physical and software systems are needed in order to make this $130 trillion global economy move to a sustainable development trajectory. And these 6 transformations, or 6 systemic areas of change, I believe summarize a lot of what needs to be done. Energy and agriculture are certainly the 2 major challenges on environmental sustainability. And they're the main challenges because energy is the main driver of global climate change, global warming, and agriculture is the main driver of land use change and loss of biodiversity and ecosystem destruction. Between the 2 of them, they are certainly not the only, but major drivers of the pollutants, industrial toxics and other pollutants that are also part of the environmental degradation. If you add into that 3, 4, and 5, this is the underlying infrastructure of how our cities operate, how our infrastructure operates, that is needed to, in a way, hardwire the world economy to be environmentally sustainable. We need new industrial ecological practices to close the waste cycle. This is transformation 3. We need to mobilize information technology much more effectively in a directed way towards making our infrastructure environmentally sound, far more efficient than it is. Information technology gives us tremendous gifts of resource efficiency if we use the technologies effectively. Most of the information technology uses right now are commercial for advertising or for streaming entertainment and for social media, not yet harnessed effectively for making our infrastructure intelligent, resource-saving, part of sustainable power systems and so on, but that's all waiting to happen. The 6th area, investments in human capital, I take to be the most important driver of more equal societies. If there's one long-term investment that is key to more equality, it is to ensure that every child has a healthy start in life and a healthy and equitable access to quality education. Because human capital is certainly the predominant source of our earnings and our ability to have sustainable livelihoods, and our societies, the United States vastly more than Canada, are marked by great inequalities of access. The US is really a tract society. If you are in a household with college-educated parents, that's a successful intergenerational household by and large. If you're in a household where parents have a high school degree or less, the chances of their children becoming prosperous, college-educated members of society is shockingly low in the United States these days. We've become two societies snarling at each other and without the social mobility that was once the hallmark of, or at least the perceived hallmark of American society. So making these transformations with different measures of importance are the key, in my view, to making the transformation to sustainable development. We know a lot about these things, but we don't know enough about these transformations, both in some of the technological bases, for example, a low or zero carbon energy system based on high intermittent energy. We know how many challenges that poses. None of them is insurmountable or fundamental, but they are challenging economically and managerially and technologically and need to be solved. I'd say the food sustainability is a huge challenge on many, many different levels. We do not have a model of sustainable food systems globally. From many points of view, what is produced is not healthful. What is processed is even less healthful. We have food industry-induced epidemics of obesity and metabolic disease all over the world, led by our major food companies. Farm practices are not sustainable from the point of view of soils, chemical, water supplies. The food systems are highly vulnerable to the ongoing climate change. And yet this is such a slow-moving process in which elites are completely buffered that we don't recognize it. Poor people suffer hunger and disease that are not linked to these phenomena. The ecosystems are degraded, but everything moves slowly enough that we are even unaware of this encroaching disaster. And the farm systems are highly complex. They're all contextual, localized, depending on local ecosystems, on soil formation, on the local biodiversity, on the crop choices, on so many factors that there is no off-the-shelf solution. And there are hundreds or thousands, depending on your degree of resolution, different farm systems that need to be attended to because people live and depend on these food and other agricultural products in ways that need fundamental change. The amount of research on this is tiny. The agricultural research is absolutely predominated by industrial giants like Monsanto or others, which are about monoculture production in a very narrow sense and are contributors to a tremendous amount of the ecological mess that we're facing. And we just don't even have the attention span to understand what's happening right now. So I wanted to take that as the, I was going to say some things about all of this, but I won't. Just to come to a research agenda. What are some of the things that Canada, in particular, from an analytical point of view, needs to consider, in my opinion? This is an outsider's view so with all apologies, but to emphasize some of the areas where I think solid thinking is needed and some of the areas where Canada is a natural leader also, and where a Canadian network can play a global role. First is energy transformation. Again, I emphasized it last night and I'll emphasize it again today. Canada has two energy challenges. One is to become clean and green internally, and the other is to stop exporting the damage to the rest of the world. The political track is to do the first and not to do the second right now. Both are extremely important for Canada's transformation and for the world's transformation. We don't want your dirty stuff, and you should not want to be exporting it to the rest of the world, just as you don't want to use it at home. This means making a clear vision of what can be done for transformation, and your institute has done such a study. I'd like to see actually, I don't know the study, I apologize, so I was happy to hear about it, but I believe that a deeper visioning of the energy transformation for Canada is crucial. My experience is that politicians do not understand the potential. They certainly don't understand the time urgency and the need, and they really do not have in their minds a concrete vision of where society and where energy systems need to move and what is possible given the resource base that is available. In the United States, we never had such a study until very, very recently. Of course, with Trump, it's all in abeyance for the moment, but even at the state level and regional level in the United States, there is finally a recognition that one needs to understand what a zero carbon system looks like, what new infrastructure needs to be designed, what kind of transformations need to be made, how cities need to remake themselves for all electric transport, mobility, heating, and so forth. Well, Canada needs to do this, so this is one area that I would emphasize. Second is sustainable agriculture. Canada itself is both an agricultural powerhouse globally in many areas, and it is in environmental crisis because of agriculture in a number of areas also, including fisheries, including forest ecosystems, and other subjects. Again, with a national scale network, different universities can focus on their local provincial ecosystem challenges in a way which would bring together a national picture in a highly effective way. A third area that Canada really can take a major role, of course, is Arctic change. And we know that the Arctic is undergoing extraordinarily dramatic change. Just in the last days, Arctic temperatures have been 10 to 20 degrees C warmer than usual. This is part of the weird weather that we've been having throughout Ontario and the US Northeast in recent seasons. But the Arctic is undergoing phenomenally rapid and very dangerous change right now with teleconnections to climate around the world. There are so many manifold, large-scale changes ahead that we need much greater understanding of this, and I would hope that Canadian universities will get together with other Arctic countries to help understand much more deeply the science of Arctic change. Canada is also a significant mining country, both within Canada and internationally. The mining sector is it's a hugely important sector and a hugely problematic sector from countless social and environmental points of view. And that's another area where I think more research can be done. Of course, the First Nations challenges in Canada are front and center of Canadian politics, and the challenges of Indigenous populations around the world are central in dozens of countries, and for maybe 7 or 8% of the world's population in Indigenous populations. I think we all know and understand there's probably not one place in the world where the Indigenous populations are not highly discriminated against, suffering extreme poverty, having experienced a history of massive exploitation and violence. And these are pervasive global challenges, and I hope that SDSN Canada will really feature in a significant way the First Nations challenges and the First Nations participation in this network. Canada is maybe the world's most successful country in migration. In at least, I would say, the most successful country of the high-income world in managing migration in a positive, politically and socially uplifting way compared to what's happening, say, in the United States, where we're just in the worst vulgarities and racism imaginable from the Oval Office down right now. And Canada has found, so far, thank God, a healthy and constructive approach and balance. I think you could teach the world a lot about this. This will be a major political issue for decades to come. We are at the UN negotiating a global pact for migration right now. It's fraught with difficulty. The United States, as per Trumpland, immediately declared that it would not even be part of this agreement. The U.S. is a rogue country right now. Anything that says international, Mr. Trump's mind is get out. That's why we'll have the Iran announcement this afternoon, most likely to pull the U.S. out. He's a nasty person, a sociopath, but the whole country is also in the grips of this terrible politics right now. It's not only Trump, although he's the cheerleader right now. But this migration issue is everywhere in political upheaval. Please teach us something, and please help to focus on an understanding of this issue from Canada's point of view, because Canada really has made, at least for an outsider looking in, a normative and cultural and political and administrative set of arrangements that seem to work very, very well for this country. Another topic that I think is obviously distinctive for us in the US, for Canada SDSN, and for the upcoming Mexico SDSN is for the university networks to work together to protect the common space of North America, again, from US politics, and to promote continental scale solutions, for example, in energy or in ecosystem management or in migration and other topics. So one very good idea that I mentioned last night emanating from some of the Mexican leadership is a North American SDSN, which will bring together the 3 national chapters so that we can consider NAFTA scale issues in all of our SDG deliberations. And the final area that I would like the network to work on is Canada's development assistance, where a lot more should be done. Canada is a surprisingly low giver in development aid. Hard to understand because it's just not consistent with so much else of this country. And I'll show you the, I think I had a picture here, yeah. This is the official development aid as a share of gross national income for all of the OECD countries. Oops, the DAC membership. And the countries that give the above the 0.7 line, that's the target that Lester Pearson's commission set already 47 years ago. There are just a handful of them: Norway, Luxembourg, Sweden, Denmark, Germany, and the UK at last count. Not bad, the UK joined this list. Germany temporarily, mainly that's counting funding for refugees, and the supposedly center-left SPD finance minister has just announced that they're going to reduce that number to 0.5. Pretty disgusting for a center-left finance minister, I have to say. But Canada is at about 0.26 right now. This is really odd for this country, frankly. Why it's so low, of course, this is 10 years of conservative government, but this government, the current government, doesn't seem to be wanting to make much change in that as well. And I find that both wrong-headed and surprising. And think that the network could do some research about Canada's official development assistance and how it could effectively increase, and what areas should be priority, how Canada can benchmark itself against other high performers, and so on. The US, by the way, is at 0.18 and falling. We are spending now, what is it, about 30 times more on the military than we are on development aid. Nasty, mean, militarized, sick, by the way. This is our politics. It's very, very bad. And I've given up temporarily on doing anything about it because there's absolutely no will, no life, no knowledge in the US in terms of making these changes. Nonetheless, we have to persevere. I mean, I'm fighting it, but without any success. Let me mention also private development aid. The original idea of the Pearson Commission was 0.7% from government, 0.3% from private civil society, individual donors or philanthropies or foundations or companies in corporate social responsibility. These days, the place with the money, of course, are the richest families in the world. Forbes magazine releases the annual report of billionaires each year. There are 2,208 billionaires on the Forbes list for 2018. They have a combined net worth of $9.1 trillion. That's a lot of funding. That means just 1% from the world's billionaires would be a flow of $91 billion of development aid, and that would be enough to close the financing gaps on health and education for the low-income world from 2,208 people. There are, in Canada, I think it is 46 individuals on the list. I'm showing you their names, their industries, their net worth. The combined net worth of the Canadian billionaires is $150 billion. Check the list. If you know them, send them an email. Tell them Professor Sachs said hi, and that we would like to meet. And I would like, seriously, an effort to discuss with these families, the most financially fortunate people in the world, their opportunity to contribute to the problem solving of the Sustainable Development Goals, especially for the low-income people in the world who are dying of their poverty at a time when we have wealth beyond imagining in the world. So this is the analytical agenda from my point of view, or an example of the analytical agenda that University of Waterloo and its partners across the country, I think, can take on and really show phenomenal leadership intellectually in Canada and an inspiration for the entire world. Finally, let me mention briefly, I know I've gone on a little too long, but let me mention briefly some of the global research projects that SDSN has underway where we look for your full participation, your insights, guidance, active leadership on different segments of this work. First is the annual reporting on SDG metrics, and we've already heard from Statistics Canada of the great work of bringing the SDG metrics to provincial level and to city level, and we look forward to working together with you on this and WGSI, sorry, I was going to put a C in there, WGSI, WGSI. Right, it is 4 letters. Okay, got it. And with WGSI on the metrics. So we have many, many projects on measurement, and as we heard, measurement is essential for achievement and accountability. There's no question about it. Second is a project called The World in 2050, which is an analytical project housed at the International Institute of Applied Systems Analysis in Luxembourg, Austria, which is a multi-country, multi-research center envisioning process for sustainable development trajectories to mid-century, looking at the issues that I've mentioned, the 6 transformations, but across all world regions and quantitatively. Can the world achieve sustainable development? A basic question. And how can all regions participate in this, and how can this global sustainable development truly be consistent with the planetary boundaries? A third project, again, where Canada will be heavily involved is what we call FABLE, standing for Food, Agriculture, Biodiversity, Land Use, and Energy. It is the land use perspective on sustainable development. What areas should be protected as reserves? How should farmlands and forest lands be effectively managed? How can carbon be biologically stored as part of the mitigation process, and so forth? It's amazingly tricky to try to bring the multiple perspectives of agronomy, biodiversity, ecology, energy systems, and climate change into a coherent vision. But this is the purpose of this project, is to try to make a coherence through a perspective of land use, to understand how land use choices are fundamentally part of all of these dimensions of biological conservation, food systems, and energy and climate solutions. Another project to mention quickly is called Ethics in Action. It is a project that engages global philosophers and religious leaders of many different faiths at the Vatican every couple of months to discuss the philosophical and theological, religious, and practical ethical underpinnings of the Sustainable Development Goals. It is aiming to broaden the base of understanding and support of the SDGs among the world's main religions. And of course, Pope Francis has been one of the essential progenitors of the SDGs. He spoke the day that they were adopted, spoke at the UN the day that they were adopted, and his encyclical Laudato Si is a foundational text for the Sustainable Development Goals. And this is a project to reach many of the world's major religions. We have a project called Move Humanity, that is to email your next door neighbor billionaires to get them to contribute 1% per year of their net worth towards the SDGs. And really, I would like your partnership on that. This is a serious effort to reach these individuals and the families on a detailed discussion basis for their contributions to the SDGs. The Deep Decarbonization Pathways Project is now 5 years in operation. We have an annual series of meetings called LESC, the Low Emission Solutions Conference. The idea is to help policymakers and businesses understand the long-term systemic transformation to a low-emission economy, what I talked about earlier. And finally, we have work on well-being. What's the point of all of this? The point should be well-being. And the US stands out again as a remarkable warning case of a country that is very rich, getting richer by normal data, and getting less happy by the year. With major crises of public health, major crises of distrust, major crises of loss of legitimacy of institutions. It's a shocking failure of affluence, basically. It's the incapacity to manage affluence to achieve well-being. So we publish each year now 2 volumes, a World Happiness Report, which ranks countries. Canada is near the top, you'll be happy to know. We publish also something called the Global Happiness Policy Report, which is an attempt to mobilize world experts in well-being across many domains: business, schools, public administration, public health, and other areas to identify public policies that put well-being explicitly as a focus of the public policy outcomes and measure well-being. I don't know if Statistics Canada is measuring well-being in detail, but you should be measuring subjective well-being, asking people, how do you feel about the quality of your life? This is extremely informative and important and gives all sorts of insights, and it's a significant research program of SDSN. All of this is to say that the reason SDSN is a university-based and think tank-based initiative is, as I tried to emphasize it last night and this morning, we need to think through complex challenges. Governments are not designed for complex thinking. They're not. And to bemoan that fact is not very constructive, actually. We in universities and think tanks should be presenting detailed evidence, data, argumentation, pathways, policy analyses. Politicians, at their best, help to build coalitions, help to communicate, help to build understanding, and help to find the practical organizational and financial pathways to well-being and to the common good. But they cannot do it without the knowledge base, and that fundamentally is the purpose of SDSN Canada. Thank you.
So good morning. I've been asked to talk about the networks program and in particular about what other networks at SDSN are doing. So my name is Maria and I head this program within SDSN. I work with Jeff. So the network of universities that the University of Waterloo is going to set up in Canada will be joining more than 750 universities across the world. We have, as of today, 26 networks distributed in all continents. And I think one of the biggest assets of these networks is that they are completely locally hosted. So this is a university from Canada led by a local leader and responsive to local challenges, to local opportunities. So you will be setting your agenda for Canada, but you will be connected to this global movement that SDSN is. You will be connected to more than 750 other universities. You will be connected to international processes, to UN processes, as well as to a body of international and globally known sustainable development experts through our Leadership Council. Our networks focus on the activities that Jeff has just explained that can be perhaps categorized in these 4 objectives. So the first is localizing the SDGs. What do the SDGs mean for Canada? What are the specific challenges that Canada is going to face in implementing them? But then what are the opportunities for Canada? What are the specific indicators that Canada needs to develop to have a very granular sense of how progress is being made? What role can different sectors play in this network? The networks also vet and launch solution initiatives. These are projects that are very transformational, very innovative, and that address very specific needs. And then again, they make sense for a local context, but at the end of the day, we see that the work that many networks are doing is very much connected to other regions of the world. These networks promote high-quality education and research. As Dean Andrew was saying yesterday, this is what universities do best. And they do so by thinking about how can the universities really teach sustainable development across the board. Some universities are using the materials of the SDG Academy, and I think there's going to be a talk about that later today. Other universities have put together panels of presidents of universities thinking about whether we need an SDG course that goes into every single faculty, or do we need every single course to have a piece of sustainable development integrated in it, etc. Our networks are also participating and developing long-term sustainable development pathways. Jeff mentioned the deep decarbonization strategy pathways, as well as the FABLE project. These are essential tools that really map out whether or not these sustainable development trajectories are feasible. And they become an essential communication tool to engage society in this transformation that we need to do. And they also become a way to engage our governments, because we now know that it's possible. This is a map of the coverage that we have right now. It's going to be a very cool interactive map in our new website in the coming months, but I just wanted to give you a sense. To this, we need to add the US very, very soon, a national network in Mexico also, South Africa, we're also in conversations there, as well as China, and also Eastern Europe. So what are some of the initiatives that our networks are putting together? So in terms of localizing the SDGs, take, for example, South Korea SDSN. So they, in the last 4 years, they've put together 13 seminars and conferences around the SDGs and the Paris Agreement. They've published 8 substantive reports on these topics, and they've provided official inputs to the national and regional governments, actually, on 3 occasions. Our Spanish network, for example, was able to sit together the 7 most voted political parties 2 weeks ahead of one of the most tense elections that we've had in the last 15 years, I would say, and have them sign a declaration to implement a commitment to implement the SDGs. and perhaps more interestingly, to have a conversation of what this agenda meant for them. This was, of course, very much picked up by the press that was suddenly talking about the SDGs just after the adoptions and ahead of the elections. Some of our networks are doing very cool initiatives, and fun awareness raising. I love the idea of engaging the thief. Yes, take advantage of the TIF and make it SDG related. And as Helle said this morning, it will become not just a success for Canada, but internationally marked by the SDGs. We have a network that put together a short film festival to promote the SDGs, or our Southeast Asia network has developed a card game on the SDGs. Some of our networks have been using materials from SDSN, like the SDG Index and its dashboards, not just to communicate the SDGs and where the country is at, but to really train public officials in the benchmark, where are we at? So our Sahel network, for example, did a series of regional networks with policymakers in Mali, in Burkina Faso, in Niger, and they used the SDG dashboards for this. And I always remember the dean of economic development there, the chair of our network, explaining how he was in this meeting room with 80 policymakers, thinking about what should we prioritize in one of these three countries, the majority of them being men, let's say, around 60, and no one thought that gender equality should be a priority for this specific country. And then, of course, once the dashboard was put out and all of the benchmark that the SDG Index had done, it became very clear that actually this should be a priority. So after this work, actually the network was mandated officially to help in the development of the implementation strategy. And this has happened to several of our networks. So I think we now have 5 networks that have official mandates from the government to provide advice in the implementation strategies. Again, our Nigerian network used the materials of the SDG Index to prepare some communication tools to help understand where the country is at and what are areas to think about. In terms of solution initiatives, one of our first networks to launch a solution initiative was the Mediterranean SDSN. They put together what we call the Plastic Busters. This is a project to map the distribution, but also the concentration of micro and macro plastics in the Mediterranean region. And it has a number of very innovative components. So number one is it's not just looking at the concentration, but it's looking at the impact that plastics have in the marine fauna, and it does so in a very non-invasive way. And then they've also partnered with Novartis to look into the pathogens that microplastics have. So they realized that the presence of bacteria is much, much higher than the normal levels around these hotspots of microplastics. And this could be a potential solution because these bacteria could help destroy plastics, but then also it could be a potential risk for human health. Many of our networks are doing what we call solution conferences. So they put together a 1 or 2 day action-oriented program where they bring the public sector, but fundamentally the private sector, as well as investment funds, foundations, and the academics, to really think about specific projects that they can move forward. Some networks have then provided seed funds for some of these solutions, and others have produced reports to map the solutions. Typically, these happen either at a very small scale, so solutions for a specific city, what do we need, how can we make sure that these challenges get addressed in the next 1-2 years, or thematically oriented. So if we think of oceans in the Scandinavian region, what do we have, what do we need to make happen? And we're looking into establishing a solutions platform. This is one of these reports produced by the Scandinavian SDSN. Our networks focus on education and research initiatives. There's going to be a talk from the SDG Academy head of educational programs, so I won't go into too much detail on that. But our networks use the materials produced by the Academy and blend them with local materials. We've very recently had our Mediterranean network also produce a regional network in partnership with the Barilla Foundation. And think about what that means. So this is a MOOC that has been done with professors from the region of the Mediterranean, discussing sustainable food production, which is clearly an interconnected challenge for this region. And students get to hear voices from the whole region, speaking their own languages and providing reading materials that are pertinent for the region. Here we have a picture of one of the chairs of our Turkish network that has been using the Age of Sustainable Development MOOC, but then also the Planetary Boundary MOOC. And one of the things that he was telling me is, just imagine the opportunity that it is for us to have our students have a course with Johan Rockström, to hear about planetary boundaries by the person that actually proposed this definition. And again, Amber will go into more detail of what this means, but the students get to interact online with the professors as well as with each other across the globe. Our networks are also putting summer programs together, focusing either on a specific topic or training public officials. One of our networks has also been training business leaders. And there's at least 2 networks that have put together a committee of presidents of universities that are thinking about how to train sustainable development at the national level, redefining the curriculum. So here we have a sample of the amazing summer program that our Amazon network puts every 2 years. It's a 3-week program in the Amazon, so really quite an exciting initiative. And finally, our networks work on these long-term pathways for sustainable development. Jeff went into quite a bit of detail yesterday about the Deep Decarbonization Pathway Project as well as FABLE. Canada did prepare a report in 2015 for the Deep Decarbonization Pathway Project, but there's still quite a bit to disentangle. And within that report, there is a clear sense that understanding the land use-based emissions would be crucial for a country like Canada. So this is an encouragement for the Canadian network to really join the FABLE project, where I think we can really get a more sophisticated, nuanced vision of where the country can be headed. I know that there's a bunch of new universities here, or universities that are not yet part of SDSN. I encourage you all to search in our website and apply for membership. It's free. The application process is quite simple. If you don't find the link easily, this is going to change, but please reach out to me or to John. There are a number of benefits in joining our network, not just to get engaged with the Canada SDSN, but also this body of international network of universities. We have an online members-only platform, and we are now, as I said, redeveloping our website. We're going to be featuring the work of our member institutions very prominently. We're going to be developing a full strategy to communicate the amazing work that is being done by universities across the world in the area of the SDGs. So just to finish, I want to say that I think this is perhaps the 14th launch that I've been at since I joined SDSN at the beginning, and I'm moved every single time. I was just amazed yesterday with the amazing passion, the enthusiasm, and of course the rigor with which Jean and her team have taken this challenge of leading this network. I think there's so much potential here, and we're absolutely excited to be in support of your work and to find ways to help visibilize the role that Canada can play. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Sachs. Thank you, Ms. Pook. We really appreciate all of the support that you've given us through the process of creating this new national network. I'm told that we don't have time for questions at this stage. We're going to kind of keep things moving along, but that these folks will be here for a little while longer this morning, so there may be a chance to ask some questions and make some connections informally. I just want to take a minute or two before we wrap up here to kind of do a little bit of the road mapping of where we go from here. So over the course of the day, we do have a couple of specific working goals. Dean Jean, as we like to call her here in Waterloo, has suggested that we have two kind of key objectives today. One is that we're all here in the same space, but we really need to work to create a national network. We need to start networking and talking to each other. And the focus of that networking activity today is giving us some direction around a few key themes. So you'll see in the agenda, in the materials that you received when you checked in this morning, that we're going to break into a series of workshops over the course of the morning. In a few minutes, we'll move to the first of those workshops after a very brief coffee break, give you some caffeine. The first of those will be on the topic of education and training for sustainability. That's going to be in room A120. The second, which will happen at the same time, is on sustainable and inclusive cities, and the location for that discussion has changed. That's now going to be right here in this space, so you can stay in this room for that discussion. These are self-selecting groups, so it's up to you to choose which of these is most aligned with your interests or your research or the objectives of your organization. Once those initial meetings have been held, we'll take a break for lunch out in the foyer, and then we'll reconvene for two additional sessions, one in room A120 on Canada's energy climate nexus, and the other in room B142 on doing justice to life on land and below water. In each of these sessions, we will have rapporteurs and note-takers who will be gathering information, and in our closing plenary, we'll be bringing a lot of that information back to help us map out some initial steps for SDSN Canada. So you don't need to take notes yourselves, although we certainly welcome that. We want to sort of have you take resources back to your own community, but we are gathering the information as it comes together so that we can make specific and concrete use of this moving forward. And with that, I want to finish by just offering thank yous. Thank you to our presenters and our panelists. Thank you to all of you. And in keeping with our acknowledgements, we'll say Chimigwich, Niawen, merci, thank you, good luck over the course of the day.